was almost 2,000, somewhere along the lines of 1,900 meters. Or is it full length? The Breacher class had a super laser imposed on it, which didn't work. Some assumed that the Assault class would have a similar super laser. However, due to the limitations of super laser technology at the time of its construction, this was abandoned, and instead, the Assault class was equipped with hundreds of heavy turbo lasers, with the idea being that after it engaged a star system and breached through the main defenses, it would then be used to perform planetary bombardment. This planetary bombardment functionality was the original purpose of the Assault class after it breached main defenses, as the Venator was actually not a very good planetary bombardment vessel. It was too small, and honestly, all of its weapons were in the wrong location. Thus, it required too many ships to perform a planetary bombardment with any effect. This inevitably resulted with the Assault class being extremely, extremely well armed, considering everything. So, what does this Assault class look like? Meet the Assault class Star Destroyer. On the bottom hull, it is literally just guns. Guns everywhere. The bottom of this ship was literally designed with the idea that it would be outfitted with enough firepower to bombard anything, anywhere, at any time. Now, that's not to say that it was missing weapons on the upper surface of the ship. On the surface, it had multiple anti-capital ship turbo lasers. A plethora of them. These were intended to allow it to engage capital ships, while simultaneously allowing it to engage in assault operations against planets. Overall, it also had several mounted forward fixed cannons to allow the ship to engage defenses as soon as it arrived on planet or in system, where it would just simply start firing, aiming to destroy the lead capital ships if in its way to punch a hole in the defenses. While it does not have the most significant point defenses, it does in fact have point defensive cannons. Several of them, in fact. Including point defenses attached to the bridge. These point defenses were basically there in order to serve as a deterrent from destroying the main sensor network that the ship used to track targets for its large number of guns. These main sensor nodes had to be protected, otherwise the entire ship's weapons complement would slowly start to fail, as they could no longer target bitlock the way they needed to. So, how big would this thing be in actual scale? Well, it just so happens that Sauron 2012 built some very good replicas of 1/3 scale starships. Among them is this Venator. Now, the Xilifur would be regularly escorted by 2, 3, maybe even 4 of these, and possibly a couple of acclimators as well. Let me see if I can align that slightly better. There we go. Come on, slow down. Back up. But this is it roughly in comparison to a Venator. And how big a actual Venator would be when put next to this monstrosity. The Assault Star Destroyer class was bigger than a Venator, nearly twice as wide. I mean, in comparison, a Venator would basically be able to very comfortably park inside the ship if it... Well, I mean, no, not really, but you could probably fit 2, possibly 3 Venators into the space of one of these vessels, as just its command section is nearly as big as the entire hull of the Venator, or its main hangar. That's not including that despite the fact that it has a massive ship, it also has a massive hangar bay. Technically, it actually has 3 massive hangar bays. 2 side-mounted ones directly connected to the bottom. Okay, there it is. And then 1 main hangar bay. Now, the thing is, the official lore states that towards the end of the Clone Wars, when basically what happened is the Anakin essentially ending the Clone Wars in one fell swoop, the design for the Xilifur, or the Assault Star Destroyer class, was benched. Effectively cancelled, as it was deemed no longer necessary. Since the class itself became immediately obsolete, the design was never completed. So, advance about 20 years, and the Battle of Endor takes place. This was the effective end of the Empire, when the Emperor died at Endor. By then, let's see, which one of these is done by... Okay, I want the Soren 2012 version. By then, the Star Destroyer, or the, well, by then, the common Star Destroyer was the ship of the line. And most believed that the Star Destroyer, and since the Star Destroyer was the main ship of the line, there was very rarely any reason to to deploy new ship classes, although we do know that multiple new ship classes were deployed during that period, including the Super Star Destroyer class. But here it is compared to an ISD-1. So, after the death of the Emperor, Kuwait drive yards begin production of the first of 3 assault star destroyers: the Xilifur, the Zion, and the Xilifur. That's the official lore. There were 3 of these ships built. The reason they were built is because with the introduction of the Mon-Cal cruiser, which the Star Destroyer could handle in a one-on-one fight, but was otherwise, unfortunately, not what the Empire was looking for. Now, as you can see, the Xilifur is still technically even bigger than the Imperial class, but also features a far more compact main bridge section. Okay, apparently I pasted a second one in. I did not know that was there. Or it's a ghost ship? Yeah, this is a ghost ship. Ooh. No idea why that exists. But we're gonna... Okay, we are apparently lagging out quite considerably. Anyway, long story short, the Xilifur's first construction models were designed for the purpose of allowing the Empire some form of ship to deploy strong enough to take out the Mon-Cal cruisers. Anyway, since that's being contrary, I'm just going to go on with it. So, the Xilifur class actually continued to exist all the way into what would eventually be roughly another 30 years later. To begin direct competition with the First Order's brand new Resurgence class. Now, the irony is, the Resurgence class is, in fact, bigger on a 1-to-1 scale than the Xilifur. It's actually considerably longer. By almost a full ship's length. If you were to put them end to end, the Resurgent class would extend considerably further. Oh, I can finally delete that. Ghost ship's gone! Yay! Now, the main advantage the Xilifur class has over the far newer and more modern Resurgence class is sheer firepower. The Resurgent class is actually considerably underarmed for its size class. While it does have a decent anti-aircraft defense system, it is nowhere near as heavily armed as the extensively heavily armed Xilifur class. However, the Resurgence class does have slightly better hangar components. Although this one doesn't, because it's just full thrusters. Which is where we run into the slight difference between Sauron 2012's designs are aesthetically pleasing, but contain no functional components. And now the irony about the Xilifur here is I actually designed it to be fully functional. As a full working hangar bay with ports for starfighters, multiple TIE fighter racks, including the generic TIE fighter and the elite Blue Eye Squadron and TIE fighters. As functional TIE bombers. Now, the problem is these are all way too big. In reality, these would be way, way, way smaller. I even have a Lambda shuttle parked in here. It's not a functional Lambda, or it's not a realistic Lambda shuttle because, well, the Lambda shuttle doesn't have a rear door like this, as it comes out of the bottom, but design constraints. Now, among the things this ship does have are the repair bays, what I dub the lounges. This is a waiting room. And then we have the main briefing room. This is where all the pilots would come to receive their briefings from their superior officers, with the flight crew commander having his own office here. And to support a small detachment of stormtroopers, we have a small crew lab here. Now, this leads to a mirrored waiting room. And if you're wondering what this tiny little side room is, it's the bathroom. There's a bathroom in here. There's one on the other side, too. Accessible from the repair bay. Now, that leads to this area, which is poorly lit. But this is how you get to the starfighter racks. And this leads to the next deck, which is this long, long hallway. followed by this, which leads to emergency storage. This is where the main cargo bay is, and the main cargo bay is directly behind the main flight deck. This is Flight Command. Has a good overview of the hangar, so you can see what's going on and all the ships that are launching. This leads up to engineering. This is oxygen and hydrogen processing and reactor room 4 access. There are 4 reactor rooms in here, including this is the main hydrogen in storage, and as well as the oxygen storage for the life support systems. Should just call that life support. Then we have a couple signs, including reactor room 4, or reactor room 3, which also leads to resource processing. I have refineries, I have assemblers. This section is basically just resource processing for the rest of the ship. In case it runs into a situation where it needs a lot of resources and doesn't have the opportunity to dock at a station, it's got emergency repair supplies. But on a side note, we have this tiny little room here, which is a little side corridor. This leads to Hangar Bay 2, the upper hangar. This upper hangar has its own observation room, as well as its own little airlock. The secondary room on this side is main battery storage. This is where all the batteries for the ship are. Well, actually, there's a mirrored one on the other side, which then leads you to the long, long hallway of going nowhere in a hurry. This is main engineering. As you can clearly see, it's basically where all the main reactors. There's mirrored main reactors, couple refineries, these for ore processing so that you can process materials into raw uranium to power the reactors. So that's basically what these are for. These are reactor processing. Basically, it blacklists everything except blacklists every ore except uranium and apparently silver. That I don't remember how I set this up, I'll be honest. So, from engineering, we can now begin our way up into the ship. This is the CIC, a heavily fortified chamber for the purpose of commanding the ship in case the bridge is ever destroyed. And this leads into the main stairwell, which leads to the bowels of the ship, including this one, well, technically two empty rooms. These rooms actually do have a purpose, as they're the observation decks for the main guns. Now we are in the main part of the ship, the crew quarters. Or not. Oh, I know where we are. We're not quite there yet. I think we still got one more deck to go. One more. This ship is huge. Ah, now I know where we are. This would be the Stormtrooper Barracks. Welcome to the Stormtrooper Barracks, consisting of locker rooms galore. As well as, on this end, the main armory, including a quartermaster desk. This is where all the stormtroopers would be issued their weapons. And includes a personal mess for the stormtroopers, so that they can be messy eaters. I can fix that now. But in addition to that, there's this random stairwell. Well, where does it go? This random stairwell leads up to... immediately walks out into the brig. This is the ship's brig, complete with individual cells. And honestly, I would not want to be stuck in here because you're basically trapped between two loud oxygen devices. And yes, the brig does have its own command center with its own private bathroom, so that they can guard and monitor the people who come in or out of the brig. But in reality, this floor is actually the officers' quarters. This is where all the Imperial officers are going to be. They have individual rooms with desks and assorted other things, so that they can basically have some privacy and at least have a little bit of service. Higher-ranking officers receiving better rooms. With more personal space. These are the generic officers' quarters, basically your standard bridge crew. Now, this also leads to the communal bathroom. Yes, unfortunately, the officers don't get a private bathroom. They have a massive communal one. But it's got a plant, so that makes up for it. In addition to that, the officers get a private dining chamber, complete with a bar. And a place to buy coffee. And some Clang Cola. And this, in turn, leads back to the main stairwell, where we go further up the ship. Which leads to the boarding exit. Which leads outside. The room you just saw... or the door that you just saw, was this one right here. This is where we currently are on the ship. This is the officer's deck, with the crew quarters extending all the way over to here. This was the observation deck that you saw earlier. So right now, we are up in the neck of the ship. This is an empty room. I never completed it. Or more precisely, I never figured out what to put there. This is the medical bay. It's in the neck of the ship. So, technically, shooting the neck of this Star Destroyer is tantamount to attacking a medical facility. And then it's basically just the main server room, which contains all the ship's computer cores. Essentially, its brain. And now, we are in the bridge section. This is the captain's quarters, or admiral's quarters, depending on where you are on the ship. Or what rank you are. You've got, the admiral's got his own personal dining chamber, got his conference table, got a private bathroom, and a private bedroom with additional resources in case he doesn't want to have to go down to the meeting. Next, we enter the bridge. There is an emergency airlock in the bridge that allows you to just basically drop out of it. That's an empty hallway. Then we have some parts storage, because you never know when you're going to need some extra parts. This leads up to the secondary section, which contains a main reactor and a spare cargo storage, in case the bridge ever does get severed from the main ship. Which in turn leads us to a convoluted hallway that leads up to the main bridge. We are now on the main bridge of the Star Destroyer, where commands will be given. Now, the thing is, technically, there's also a secondary main bridge directly above the first with an emergency escape hatch, where technically a single officer, or the admiral, can control the entire ship from way up here. Now, the ship does turn. It just does it in a typically slow fashion. Also, we have these turrets. These are the two angled side turbo lasers. At least that's what I'm calling them. Specifically, they are that gun there and that gun there. But this section has its own life support with its own emergency reactor, its own oxygen storage, and its own air vent. So in fact, just for the off chance, it also has its own private bathroom. This is also, if the hull ever gets breached, the main bridge ever gets a hull breach, the officer up here is completely safe and secure. And should the situation ever merit that they have to just GTFO, they can do a spacewalk right out the back of the ship. Now, that's not to say that the ship doesn't have a escape pod, because it does. I installed one right there. Fun part's getting to it. I can't get to it from there. We're gonna have to take a walk. I should have showed it off earlier. Oh, there is one other trick to these cannons, specifically the bigger ones. They're crewable. The 6 large cannons and the 7th large cannon are manually crewable. You can actually send a person in to crew them. Now, since I'm here, I forgot you can't open. I need to, just a second. That off. Let's see. I know I've got those. Blast door? Open. Yeah. Okay. That is the blast door that is right here. You actually saw it earlier. There we go. Okay. This is also another entrance. It's out here. Now, where we want to go is down the hallway and back down to the command center. No, not there. Alright, now, from the main command center, we head over here. Whoosh! And from here, we can go down here and welcome aboard the escape pod. Which have the hangar bay door opened. Close your emergency escape hatch door. Hit park, and hit forward. And immediately crash into something. And lose half your escape pod. That kind of thing happens. Hey, I gotta hit the other button. It's just a minor oopsie. Anyway, I can fix that later. I just needed the connector. Oh, yeah. All right. There we go. And perfect. And that's basically how that works. So yeah, there is an escape pod, it's just not a very good one. Wee boop. Now, if you're wondering where all these other doors go, the rave room. No, that's not what it's actually. This would be, I guess you could call it the main shield room. This is where the ship's actual shield generators would be. At least that's what I'm calling these things, because they're ridiculously big. And I don't really have a purpose for them. So I'm saying they're shield generators. Congratulations. So it has basically two main shield generators. I'm referring to these as the Juggernaut class shield generators, and then two minor shield generators. And then, directly upstairs, we have this. So, what is this? Very strange. This is how you access the crewable cannons from inside the ship. All of the crewable cannons, except for the one which I already showed you earlier, are accessible from the command deck. And they can go up that high, over that way. And even shoot the other cannons that are available. And turn around and shoot the main ship. It's all fun and games till someone captures your cannons. Now, there's also the emergency exit for the cannons, which was actually installed so that I would have a way to quickly access the cannons and set them up while I was building them. But yeah. This is the Xilifur Assault Star Destroyer. It is heavily armed, heavily armored, and overall a very beastly ship. And just for the sake of argument, I guess, let's give it something to shoot. So, that's the monolith. There we are. MC-80. It's not great. Actually, this is not the MC-80 I was thinking of using. I mean, it is an MC-80, but it's a very small one. Just a second. Let me get the more in-scale one. There we go. Alright, this is a MC-80 that would be more in scale with the ship. So, let's just do a quick select all. And transfer ownership to Space Pirates. And then GTFO. Because this thing is about to get shot. That is somewhat terrifying. I'm just going to let it keep shooting. Okay. Apparently it has decided it killed it enough. And when you look at the amount of damage that it did in such a very short period of time, this MC-80 is essentially gutted. The side that was actually getting shot, completely obliterated. Now, if we switch to the other side, it doesn't look that bad. I mean, you got a little bit of smoke. It's a major there. MC-80 looks fine. Oh my god, they killed him. Now, that's not to say there's a reason why one of the things I included was a looser Hulk. The looser Hulk is probably the closest ship that is competitively scaled to be capable of fighting. Come on, how far away do I have to go? Oh, it was me. This is how big the Xilifur class, or the Assault Star Destroyer, would have been when confronted with a looser Hulk battleship. When you look at them like this, the Xilifur does not seem like a terribly big ship. It's not nearly as big as one immediately thinks of when they think, oh, well, it's a huge Star Destroyer. The looser Hulk was actually bigger. Or, let me rephrase that. The looser Hulk had more mass. And the looser Hulk would have been the main ship of the line, engaging most of the Venators and other Star Destroyers. So, you can see why the Assault Star Destroyer was necessary, considering the size of a Venator in relation to it, and why the scale of the Assault Star Destroyer was set the way it was. It would have had to break through multiple looser Hulks in order to breach a blockade, and would usually be doing that almost completely unescorted, as the escort ships would not come in until after the blockade was broken. So it would need to fly in, lay as much firepower as possible onto multiple ships, several of which would be heavily shielded looser Hulks, and basically breach their defensive line. And that's not including the deployment of the Providence classes. Which, honestly, were comparably downright tiny. The Providence was roughly in scale with a Venator, but with more side-mounted firepower than a Venator could have, due to how it was designed. In a one-on-one fight, a Providence would get absolutely massacred by a assault Star Destroyer. Whereas the Looser Hulk would be able to at least put up a decent fight, sheerly by mass. Now, in the later war era, this ship would mostly have been escorted, or escorting, the extremely tiny immobilizers. Because just imagine, all this firepower, and a fleet gets ripped out of hyperspace right in front of it. So usually 2 mobilizers and 3 ISDs were assigned to each assault Star Destroyer fleet, thus allowing the assault Star Destroyer to provide enough firepower to essentially destroy any fleet that it comes up against. Now, admittedly, the assault Star Destroyers were pretty much immediately phased out due to the fact that they came up with better designs in the form of the Conqueror and the Super Star Destroyer. That's why only 3 were technically built. But, due to the sheer amount of firepower that the 3 ships had, any fleet with an assault Star Destroyer in it became a real significant threat to any opponent. And with 2 immobilizer interdictor cruisers available, it was more than capable of stopping any fleet anywhere and just laying into them with all this firepower. Heavy turbo lasers, medium turbo lasers, ultra heavy turbo lasers, just firepower galore. Few ships and even fewer fleets, especially rebel fleets, had any chance of surviving an engagement with even one of these colossal dreadnoughts. Even though, at only 2,000 meters, it did not legally classify as a dreadnought. And just for one extra thing, this is how big it would be compared to a Constitution-class starship. Yes. This is a Constitution-class starship next to this. The Constitution-class was 300 meters long, the same length as a Carillion Corvette. A Carillion Corvette fit into the hangar of a 1,600-meter-long Star Destroyer. This would be 2,000 meters. You could comfortably park multiple. In fact, you could literally dock a Constitution class inside this thing's hangar. Yeah, this thing could dock Constitution classes. That's how big it is. In comparison to what you would assume would be a regular size. So, for those Star Trek fans out there who are like, Star Destroyer could never take on a Federation starship, this is what it would look like for a Federation starship to be anywhere near a Star Destroyer. They are not the same size. Now, if you bring in the new ones, which have like the 1,600-meter long Federation starships, then you start getting to the point where it's just like, oh yeah, now we just have Star Destroyer or Federation starships. Woo! They're not supposed to be the same thing. If anything, a Constitution class would be barely better than a fighter in comparison to a Star Destroyer. Now, the Munificent is not in scale. A Munificent would actually be much, much smaller in comparison to a Star Destroyer. So yeah, this is really a Munificent would be about the same size as a Federation starship in comparison. But since I don't have a Munificent in that scale, we're just going to have to go with a regular-sized Munificent. Which is close to its actual Star Wars scale. But yeah. The Assault Star Destroyer class was a heavy warship intended for the purpose of engaging fortified positions. Heavily defended planets, heavily defended fleets. It was a fleet killer. Not like the Matador class. The Matador class was actually not a fleet killer. In fact, it was terrible at destroying fleets. The worst ships I could ever imagine to try and take on a fleet. Its weapons took too long to spin up. It did not have very good defenses, only having something like 20 turbo lasers in total on the upper deck, making it easily and completely outgunned in almost any battle against any other warship. A regular ISD could destroy one of the not Matador class, but well, the giant pizza ship. And against an Assault Star Destroyer like this, it would be absolutely ripped to shreds. Now, if it got the first shot off with its main cannons, like say it got a surprise attack, then yeah, it'd rip this thing to shreds. Those heavy cannons would literally just blow holes from stem to stern. But if it did not get the element of surprise and was not able to hit this ship first, this ship would rip it to shreds. Its quad cannon, its quad turbo lasers would not be enough to even take down this thing's shielding. Whee! Now, this is actually a representation of a fairly standard TIE fighter. Pretty much your generic TIE fighter. They would literally just fill these racks here. Right now, it can hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 times 3. That's 24. Right now, it can hold 24 TIE fighters in its racks. So if you multiplied that by 3, you'd get a total TIE fighter count of 3 times 4 is 12. Carry the 1. That's 2. That's 6. It has room for 73 TIE fighters. That's not including the additional fleet, which if I actually tripled the length of this and made it go all the way across, it'd be able to hold probably about 100, 200 I'd be able to at least double the number, so it'd have a total fighter complement of 144 TIE fighters capable. The capability of housing 144 TIE fighters. So it'd probably have 75 regular TIE fighters, and then the rest would be TIE interceptors and TIE bombers. It'd probably have at least a full wing of TIE bombers, considering this is an assault ship, and would need the TIE bombers for planetary assaults. It would also need drop ships for dropping ground vehicles, and the rest of the hangar would probably be taken up by the ground vehicles that it would use in assaults. So yeah, it's a pretty heavily equipped and heavily defended starship. And that's the way I designed it. It was supposed to be. It does have some underslung turrets. Not a lot of them. I really need to put that point defense back. Yeah, there's supposed to be another Gatling turret here. And there was supposed to be 2 more. Yeah. Need to fix that. These are the hangar point defenses. So yes, it did have point defenses around its hangar. Specifically the bottom one. The side hangars actually don't have any point defenses on them, or around them. I was tempted to go ahead and okay. Go ahead and slap on a couple of these. Just for the purpose of PDFs. Now let's go see if it mirrored it. Whee! Yep. So, while those would not be particular, they'd be a lot bigger in the full-size ship, so they might actually be threatening if confronted. Anyway, that is the Xilifur class Star Destroyer, and why do I keep encountering these? Where are these parts going? I know for a fact I added them when I built the ship. Anyway, that's a brief history of the Assault Star Destroyer class. And what it was intended for, and what it actually wound up serving as. I do have a name tag for it, although there we go. But that is the Assault Star Destroyer class. With its really unique trench line, complete with its secondary hangars. Now, this would be a secondary escape pod section, but I never finished building it. So this is where the second escape pod would be. Whee! So yeah, there's supposed to be a second escape pod there. So there would be a grand total of 2 available escape pods to get the heck out of the ship, should the situation ever merit that the ship needs to be evacuated. And since I didn't really show it off that much, this is the engine section of the ship. Consisting of 2 auxiliary thrusters, 1 main thruster, and 2 double-decker smaller thrusters. These would basically be just 1 big thruster, or the regular version. All in all, the Xilifur is enormous. I don't think I can stress enough how big this ship actually would be. And how terrifying it would be to just about be anybody facing this thing in combat. This is somebody's old interdictor class. I don't think this would be in scale, because I think the interdictor class was actually roughly about the same size as the, it was roughly about the 300 to 500 meter range. So, this would not be an accurate representation of these 2 ships. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my personal review of the Xilifur class Star Destroyer. I may create a gutted down version for the purpose of ensuring that it actually functions. Similar to the hollow ships you saw earlier that Sauron 2012 made. Anyway, that's that. Hope you all enjoyed the review, and maybe I'll put this up on the workshop and you can all tear it apart and blow it to pieces in your own reviews.